It was a clear and quiet spring morning in the affluent suburb of New Canaan, Connecticut, when 50-year-old Jennifer Dulos loaded her 5 children into the car and drove them to school, just as she had done countless mornings before. She seemed calm, composed, her day already mapped out with intention and purpose. After dropping the kids off, she planned to return home, change vehicles, and make her way into New York City for 2 back-to-back medical appointments, one scheduled for 11 in the morning and a second at 1 in the afternoon. There was nothing unusual about the plan. She had plenty of time, the drive was familiar, and the day held no apparent cause for alarm. But Jennifer Dulos never made it to those appointments. She never made it out of her own home. On that morning in May 2019, she simply vanished, and the life she had carefully built for herself and her children came to a sudden and devastating halt. When the nanny arrived that afternoon to bring the children home from school, the house was eerily still. Jennifer was nowhere to be found. The car she had driven that morning was gone from the driveway, but her Land Rover, the vehicle she was supposed to switch into for the trip to the city, sat untouched inside the garage. Alarmed, the nanny contacted a close friend of Jennifer's, and together they called the police to report a missing person. Officers arrived at the home by 7 o'clock that evening. Jennifer had not called anyone to explain an absence. She had not responded to a single message or phone call all day. Those who knew her understood that this was deeply out of character, and they were frightened. They also knew exactly why they were frightened. Jennifer had been living in the shadow of a bitter and prolonged divorce from her estranged husband, a man her friends and family described as controlling, volatile, and at times openly threatening. Fotis Dulos had grown up in Greece before immigrating to the United States in 1986. He was, by all outward appearances, a man of considerable ambition and polish. He had attended Brown University and gone on to earn a graduate degree in management and finance from Columbia University. In 2000, he had married for the first time, though that marriage ended in divorce by 2004. That same year, he founded the Four Group, a luxury home construction company that operated across Farmington and the surrounding Connecticut communities, catering to the upper end of the market. Jennifer Farber had also attended Brown University, graduating in 1990, and later completed a Master of Fine Arts in Writing at New York University. Her family carried significant social and financial standing. Her aunt and uncle were the founders of the iconic American fashion brand Liz Claiborne. Jennifer and Fotis had first crossed paths at university, and a romance developed, though it was complicated from the start by the fact that Fotis was still legally married to his first wife at the time. His divorce from that marriage was finalized just 1 month before he and Jennifer, wed the couple, settled in the prosperous town of Farmington, Connecticut, and in the years that followed they built what looked from the outside like a full and successful life together, raising 5 children, including 2 sets of twins, 3 sons and 2 daughters, and enjoying the fruits of Fotis's thriving construction business, with frequent vacations and the kind of financial comfort most families only dream of. But beneath the surface, the marriage had been fracturing for years. As early as 2012, Jennifer had confided in close friends that things between her and Fotis were not right. The tension had grown into something darker. Then in 2017, during a family vacation, Fotis began an affair with Michelle Troconis, a younger woman from Venezuela, in a pattern that echoed behavior Jennifer had apparently endured before. According to those close to her, Jennifer had quietly decided to leave. She began making her preparations carefully, gathering what she needed without alerting Fotis to her intentions, knowing from experience that confronting him directly could provoke an unpredictable and dangerous reaction. Over the years, she had told friends that Fotis had become increasingly possessive, that arguments between them had escalated, and that he had on more than one occasion made threatening remarks. When the time came, she took her children and left, filing for divorce and renting a home in New Canaan, Connecticut. The legal proceedings that followed were exhausting and contentious. The custody dispute over their 5 children dragged on for months, growing more hostile at every turn. A judge ultimately restricted Fotis to supervised visits with the children in light of his increasingly erratic and aggressive conduct during the proceedings. His bitterness at the situation, by all accounts, continued to deepen. On May 24, 2019, police officers entered Jennifer's New Canaan home to conduct a welfare search and look for any evidence that might point to her whereabouts. The team was led by Officer Thomas Patton. They worked through the property methodically, checking every room in the 6-bedroom house and the attached garage. The main floor appeared undisturbed. Upstairs, nothing seemed out of place. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no indication that anything had gone wrong. Even the basement came up empty. Then in the kitchen, officers noticed a large bag sitting on the floor near the entrance. Positioned as though it had simply been set down by someone in a hurry, inside were papers and a jacket belonging to Jennifer, consistent with the idea that she had come home that morning as planned, perhaps intending to drop her things before heading back out. But she had never left in the Land Rover. The vehicle she arrived in was missing. When officers returned to the garage for a closer look, one of them noticed something unsettling. The car had been cleaned, but not well enough. The rear section showed visible scratches and, more troublingly, traces of what appeared to be dried residue consistent with a disturbing scene. One officer observed that the scratches formed a repeated, deliberate pattern. The initial thought was that perhaps an animal had been struck and the car had since been washed, but that theory quickly gave way to something far more serious. While some officers photographed the vehicle, others began searching for the missing car Jennifer had driven that morning. Forensic specialists collected samples from the garage vehicle, and what followed was a cascade of grim discoveries. Traces consistent with a violent incident were found on the kitchen faucet, on the floor, under the hood of the car, on the bumper, on a wheel, and on the interior door connecting the garage to the entryway. Additional traces were identified on kitchen surfaces, on the walls, and along the garage door frame. All samples were sent for DNA analysis. If those traces belonged to Jennifer, it would mean that someone had attempted to erase the evidence of what had happened inside that home, and had not entirely succeeded. Jennifer's missing car was located the same afternoon, abandoned in a park roughly 2 kilometers from the house. There was no sign of Jennifer anywhere near it. The possibility that something terrible had befallen her could no longer be dismissed. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Fotis Dulos. On May 25, 2019, he was asked to come to the police station to speak with detectives. He was met by Officer Patton and Detective Christopher Allegro. When asked whether he had any information about Jennifer's whereabouts, he expressed willingness to cooperate, but his attorney intervened and cut off any substantive conversation. When detectives requested his phone, Fotis initially agreed, but his attorney took it back and demanded that a warrant be obtained first. Investigators waited until 9 o'clock that night before the warrant came through, and they subsequently took possession of 2 phones belonging to Fotis. What those devices revealed began to paint a very detailed and damning picture. On the day of Jennifer's disappearance, the location data from Fotis' phone placed him at a construction site for much of the morning, and for the majority of the day he appeared to be at his residence in Farmington, roughly an hour and a half from New Canaan, information that might at first have seemed to clear him. But that evening, he had traveled to Hartford, only about 15 minutes from his home, and his phone recorded more than 30 separate stops at seemingly random locations throughout the city. That was unusual enough on its own. When detectives began reviewing surveillance footage from the locations where those stops had occurred, what they saw transformed the investigation entirely. Cameras at multiple sites captured Fotis Dulos and Michelle Trocanis moving systematically from location to location, depositing garbage bags into public trash receptacles. At one location, Fotis was filmed carrying what appeared to be a floor mat from a vehicle. At another, Michelle was seen crouching over a storm drain, apparently discarding something into it. Officers traveled to Hartford and methodically collected every bag from those trash cans, as well as the material recovered from the drainage system. Beneath a storm drain cover, investigators discovered an envelope containing altered vehicle registration plates registered to Fotis Dulos. The contents of the bags were far more significant: heavily soiled floor mats, cleaning supplies, a woman's clothing that had been cut apart, and a pair of rubber gloves saturated with what turned out to be blood. The gloves were rushed to a forensic laboratory. The DNA results confirmed that the biological material throughout the bags belonged to Jennifer Dulos. There was still no body, no weapon, and no direct witness to what had happened inside that garage on the morning of May 24th. But surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera told a coherent and chilling story. It showed Jennifer pulling into her own driveway at approximately 8 in the morning. At 10:25, her car was seen leaving the property, but no driver was clearly visible through the windows. The vehicle moved south toward the park where it was later found, captured on camera at 10:29. At 10:38, a call came into Jennifer's phone with no response. A silver-gray pickup truck, a Toyota belonging to a company employee named Pavel Gumany, had been captured on camera near Jennifer's home 3 times that same morning and had also been seen repeatedly near Fotis' property. A neighbor of Fotis named Garrison had noticed the activity in his street that day, recognized Gumany's truck, and observed that the vehicle following it appeared to be a rental. He had also noticed on his own security footage that 3 separate chimneys at Fotis' residence were producing smoke that day, despite the fact that the weather was mild and there was no wind. It was not the kind of day anyone would ordinarily light a fire. Investigators matched the timing of those fires to the arrivals and departures of the truck, and the implications were difficult to ignore. When Pavel Gumany was brought in for questioning and offered immunity in exchange for cooperation, he told investigators that Fotis had borrowed his truck that day. When it was returned, it had been thoroughly cleaned. Fotis had also advised him to sell the vehicle while it still had value, and suggested replacing the seat covers, saying they were worn. Since Guimini did not have replacement covers on hand, Fotis told him to remove the covers from his old Porsche Cayenne and swap them out. Fotis had been insistent that Guimini move quickly. A subsequent piece of surveillance footage captured Fotis arriving near Jennifer Street by bicycle that morning, waiting in place, watching. The picture that investigators had assembled suggested that he had concealed himself inside the garage and confronted Jennifer the moment she came home, that he had taken her life in that space, and that he had then meticulously attempted to clean away every trace of what had occurred before driving her car to the park and abandoning it. Investigators had established motive, opportunity, and a substantial body of physical evidence. On June 1, 2019, Fotis Dulos and Michelle Trocanis were both arrested and charged with tampering with physical evidence and hindering prosecution in connection with Jennifer's disappearance and presumed death. Both were released on bond after pleading not guilty. The search for Jennifer's remains continued. Two men who were walking through the grounds of a private fishing club in Connecticut came across something deeply unsettling and reported it to police. They described finding a freshly dug pit approximately 2 meters long, half a meter wide, and roughly 1 meter deep. The pit had been covered with metal grill grates, and inside it lay a tarp and 2 bags of calcium hydroxide, a substance sometimes used to accelerate decomposition. When one of the men returned to the location several weeks later, after wondering whether the discovery might be linked to the disappearance of a woman from New Canaan, he found that the pit had been filled in and covered with sod. He immediately contacted authorities. Officers excavated the site but found it empty. What investigators pieced together was that a man named Kent Mahoney, a practicing attorney who served as both a close friend and a business partner of Fotis Dulos, had recently held access credentials for the club and had inquired about entry to the property just before the pit was first discovered. He had also allowed his membership to lapse shortly after Jennifer went missing. On August 13, Michelle Trocanis was brought back in for a second round of questioning. She acknowledged having spent time with Mahoney on the day of the incident and mentioned that he had been on the phone with a long-standing friend of Fotis from Greece. Mahoney's phone data placed his device at his home that day, and the conversation with Fotis' contact appeared designed to help establish a verifiable alibi for both men. Had the pit not been discovered, and had Mahoney not been pulled into the investigation, it was entirely possible that his involvement would never have surfaced at all. On January 7, 2020, police obtained warrants and arrested Fotis Dulos, Michelle Trocanis, and Kent Mahoney. Fotis faced a charge of first-degree murder, while Trocanis and Mahoney were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. All three were additionally charged with evidence tampering. Fotis was released that same day after posting a $6 million bond and was required to appear in court on February 28, 2020. Michelle was also released on bail, with a court date set for August 2020. Mahoney posted his bond in October of that year. On February 28, Fotis' girlfriend at the time, a woman named Anna Curry, arrived at the courthouse and told his attorney that he would be arriving shortly. He never came. Repeated calls to his phone went unanswered. Officers were sent to his residence and found him unresponsive inside his vehicle. Emergency responders pulled him out and immediately attempted resuscitation. A handwritten note had been left inside the car. In it, Fotis stated that he refused to spend the rest of his life in prison for something he claimed he did not do. Earlier that same day, the judge presiding over the case had been expected to revoke his bail and remand him into custody to await trial. Fotis was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but died 2 days later. At the time of his death, he was on the verge of financial collapse, carrying debts of roughly $7 million and actively attempting to sell the property he lived in. With the primary suspect gone, the state could no longer pursue a criminal conviction against him. Jennifer's remains have never been found. For Michelle Trocanis, the legal proceedings carried on for 4 years before coming to trial. Prosecutors built their case on the evidence that she and Fotis had worked together to destroy and conceal the aftermath of the crime. Surveillance footage of the two of them depositing bags across Hartford was played for the jury. A man who had been experiencing homelessness at the time testified that he had gone through some of those bags before police arrived, finding 2 pillows which he put back because they were stained with what he recognized as blood. Investigators noted that 2 camping pillows had gone missing from Jennifer's garage. The clothing recovered from the bags was introduced as evidence. It bore Jennifer's DNA and biological material, and also carried a DNA profile consistent with Fotis. A bra recovered from one of the bags had a broken clasp. A blouse found alongside it had the front section cut away. A rain jacket in the same bags had been sliced through the center and showed staining of unknown origin. Most damaging of all was evidence found inside the home shared by Fotis and Trocanis, a written document outlining a coordinated version of events designed to ensure that their respective accounts of the day would be consistent and mutually reinforcing if they were ever questioned separately. It was not a plan for committing a crime. It was a plan for concealing one. At the conclusion of the trial, Michelle Troconis declined to offer a defense, and the jury returned its verdict. On March 1, 2024, Michelle Troconis was found guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for later in the year. The trial of Kent Mahoney was also anticipated to proceed in 2024, with investigators continuing to build the case around his alleged role in the attempt to dispose of Jennifer's remains. The case of Jennifer Dulos has been resolved in the eyes of the law, but no resolution could ever feel complete. Her body has never been recovered. Her children, who were young when their mother was taken from them, are now being raised by their maternal grandmother. They carry with them the permanent weight of a loss that no verdict can undo, growing up with questions that may never have answers and an absence that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Jennifer Dulos was a mother, a writer, a woman who had tried to protect herself and her children from a marriage that had turned dangerous, and who paid for that courage with everything she had. Her story is a reminder of how swiftly ordinary mornings can shatter, and of the devastation that can follow when threats made in private are never taken seriously enough in time.